It is the Pastor's Heart and Dominic Steele, and look, if our international audience could bear with us today, it is a Sydney discussion we're having. We as a city have had a dream run through COVID. This city of 5 or so million people has got off extremely lightly the last year or so, but the city is at the moment in lockdown and we're trying to work out how to navigate this Delta virus, and not least in the church community. There's a complex question of conflicting information and differing authority levels. There's issues of church and state looming in the background, and even how we as local churches relate to our denominations. An email from the Department of Multicultural Affairs sent around yesterday morning has raised discussion levels among my peers. What do we do this weekend, this Sunday, in regards to singing during lockdown? So, to try and chart a way forward, I'm joined by a friend of the Pastor's Heart, Associate Professor of Law, Neil Foster at Newcastle University. Also with me, Adrian Russell, the Senior Pastor of Northmead Anglican, and David Clark, who leads the ministry at Hoxton Park. Neil, if I could start with you, and in New South Wales and in Sydney, what are ministers and ministries legally allowed to do this Sunday? And I appreciate there's a different answer for Greater Sydney compared to the rest of New South Wales.
Yes, thanks, Dominic. So Greater Sydney is subject to stricter limits than are applicable in the rest of the state, and those are set out in the Public Health COVID-19 Temporary Movement and Gathering Restrictions Order 2021 in Part 4. And basically, in terms of Sydney, people are not allowed to leave their homes except for very limited purposes. And so going to meet together in church buildings is not one of those purposes. And so as a result, of course, many churches will be wanting to do what we've done on and off over the last year or so, which is to run a live stream. And some might want to run their live stream from in church buildings. And also there are issues as to, well, if you're running a live stream in your church building, is it okay to be there? And also, is it okay to have live singers as part of the live stream? So those are issues that are raised by the rules. And I put up a blog on my blog site last night with my views on what the public health orders require at the moment. In terms of being present in a church building to organise a live stream, I take it that is allowed because people are allowed to leave home for work. And work covers work as a volunteer if you're part of a volunteer ministry team. And indeed, ministers of religion are actually specifically allowed to leave home to attend their places of public worship. So I take it that people can be present in the building to run a live stream. In terms of singing, Clause 14 of the rules, which apply across New South Wales, actually, not just in Sydney, say that in non-residential premises, people must not normally sing, but there is an exception under Clause 14.2a, where the persons singing are performers engaged in a performance, and I take it that the rules, as they stand, would allow a couple of people to provide a musical performance as part of a live stream. So that's, broadly speaking, how I see things are as required by the public health order.
Now, when I first saw that point 14 in the public health order, I thought, that's really good because it treats churches in the same categories as performance venues. And so if you're allowed to sing along at Hamilton, then you're allowed to sing along at church. If you're allowed to sing along at a Midnight Oil concert, then you're allowed to sing along at church. Whereas we did notice in the wind down late last year and early this year that churches were treated more harshly than some of those public performance spaces. And so I was actually really encouraged when I saw that this version of the public health order come out. Did you have that same reaction?
Can I say, Dominic, just to be clear on this, you talk about singing along. I'm afraid singing along is not allowed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm clear about that.
It's just that you can have people up front singing who are performing, as you say, at either equivalent of a concert or a musical, or in my view, equivalent people who want to sing, just to sing a Christian song, which then can be streamed as part of the live stream, and people at their homes watching can join in.
Yeah, my point was just earlier, audiences were singing along to Midnight Oil, whereas in church we were all sitting 1.5 meters apart with masks and not allowed to sing in the congregation. So it was very different in church to what was going on in band and other performances in our community. So I liked that churches had been brought into line, and it was really just a clear health regulation, and churches, synagogues, mosques weren't being singled out in any way. I thought that was excellent. And so my joy, if you like, was short-lived by this email that's come out from Multicultural New South Wales, and I'll just read it here. It says, following questions from our forum yesterday, please be advised that the current public health order, under the current public health order, New South Wales Health has now confirmed that singing is not permitted in indoor areas of places of public worship. This includes during a live stream and in regional New South Wales. This rule will protect people who may be involved in assisting in live streaming an event, for example, technical assistance, or who may be in regional communities attending a service. Previously, there has been transmission via singing in a place of worship, which is of concern, particularly with this more transmissible COVID-19 variant. It seems to be in contradiction of point 14 of the public health order.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, I guess there might be a way of reading that email by which when they say singing, they mean congregational singing. If that's the case, then it's consistent because they don't specifically talk about singing as a performance. But yes, it does seem like certainly many people have taken that as contradictory to Clause 14 of the Public Health Order. And just to be absolutely clear, the Public Health Order is a part of the law of New South Wales. It's made by the Minister under the authority of the Public Health Act, and it is something for which people can be held legally liable if they breach it. But guidance or advice offered by public servants in the Department of Health does not fall into that same category. And so we need to be clear to distinguish between those things. And it seems to me that where there's a clash there, the legal obligation is imposed by the Public Health Order, and any exemptions allowed by the Public Health Order are applicable.
So why would we pay any attention at all to this email?
Well, that's a matter that perhaps others might have other views on. We do not have a presumption in Australian law that public servants in a particular area have greater weight in terms of interpreting the law than any other citizen. There are some rules of that sort over in the US, but not in Australia. So the fact is, of course, people are entitled to listen to the advice being given by public servants about how the law is meant to be framed, but ultimately the decision on what the law means is a matter for the courts, and it's a matter for interpreting according to the general principles that you interpret legal instruments by. And so, sure, we would listen to them and we would take into account their wisdom, but we aren't, in my view, not people in New South Wales are not legally bound by that advice.
Right. So, as a minister of Christ Jesus, we've got 3 ministers of Christ Jesus here, and we're all going to make decisions this weekend about what we're doing in our churches. What's your advice to us?
Well, what I would have to say, Dominic, is since you've used the A word of advice, I'm not giving legal advice. I'm offering my academic opinion. And and my academic opinion is that this is what the law requires.
The public health order is what the law requires.
That the decision as to whether to go, as it were, above and beyond what the law requires will have to be made taking into account individual circumstances, of course, and some of those things may include the views of other people in one's organisational structure. But I think the legal obligations are as I've said them to be.
Well, let's go to Adrian Russell. What's your reaction to what Neil's just said, mate?
Oh, I think it sounds like it's really wise advice, and I really appreciate the clarity that he's brought to the discussion. And it seems consistent with the way I want to approach it, that is the advice that we've been given seemed contradictory to the public health order, and let's go with the public health order until it changes. rather than responding to advice that has kind of filtered through to us secondhand in one sense. So I'm inclined to go with the public health order. And this Sunday, I think we want our church online, which I don't like being online. I'd love to be together. We want it to feel as normal as possible, and want it to be, we wish you were here, so there's nothing new. It's not fancier version of church. So I'd love to be able to have it that we kind of have a service leader, and then we have singers, and you can sing along at home and make music in your heart, those kinds of things. So I'd love to be able to do that without having to be restricted. So I think my inclination is to go with the public health order on this one and say we're allowed to. It seems to be what the law is on this one.
David Clark?
Sure. I think I've certainly appreciated Neil's advice over the last 16 months, and I think it's very much a matter of being aware that this is not the end of COVID. We're not just talking about this week. We've got to think longer term about what's happening, because if you think the decisions we're making is just this week and then COVID's over, then I'll sell your bridge. But really, Neil's been very helpful. Neil's been very helpful in clarifying again what is the law, and the law is what's being enforced by the police and those who are guiding us. We certainly have been reminded over and over again that making common sense decisions is what's really important, and we are trying very hard to make common sense decisions. In our context at Hoxton Park, we've got auditorium over 400 square metres. There's lots of space, and so we might distance a singer a bit further away from the band than we've had. We've had them more than 3 metres apart. We can make them further apart at the moment. But at the moment, I guess my ongoing concern is just what happens in other areas. There's been slow creep of the health advice to expand into a whole lot of other areas. And at the moment, this advice we've been given, the suggestion we've been given, is from an unnamed person. We don't have background information on what exactly the reasoning is for this is, and that's concerning. I'd like more information. I don't think we're going to get more information.
Well, it's an interesting thing. If it's in the public health order, it's approved by the government. If I disagree with the public health order, I can vote them out.
Absolutely.
If it comes from an unnamed bureaucrat in a health department who I can't even talk to or interact with, then the Premier said, we trust the advice of the health department. We trust the advice of the health department. The Deputy Premier said the health department advice is a lucky dip when it comes to casual contacts and close contacts. And so, what are you to do with lucky dip health advice?
Sure. I think we know longer term there are a lot of other areas in which there is debates going on about what is good for people's health and well-being. There are debates going on about conversion therapy. There are debates going on about euthanasia. There's debates going on about religious freedom. And there are people in my community, very multicultural part of Sydney, who would like bans about reading parts of the Bible or talking about Jesus because it offends people in our community who would love to say this is bad for their health. Now, do we just roll over every time someone says it's bad for someone's health, we shouldn't do this? There have been, in recent years, bans on praying near abortion clinics. And I've spoken with my local MP about that. In my case, when I come outside of the car park from Westfields, Liverpool, across the road is a women's health clinic where abortions take place, and I'm banned by the law for praying for people who are going there. And I've raised with my MP, how do you know when I'm sitting in my car in the car park of Westfields, Liverpool, whether I'm praying for those people or not? But the law has been brought about because it's perceived as a bad for the health of those women. And so there's a creep we're seeing going on that health advice is covering all sorts of areas. And so I've told my local MP I disagree with the ban on praying and that I would continue to pray. And I'm concerned that if we just say it's just about this week, it's just fine, and COVID keeps going on for another 6 months, where we find ourselves with what's been banned and prohibited for things that are really precious and valuable and important for the encouragement of God's people. in this difficult time. That's stressful for many people.
Well, if you say we're just going to do it for this week, and you take the congregation through change management of explaining to everybody why we're not going to do it this week, and then it goes on and on and on, and it's still just an email from the health department and not in the public health order,
Yes.
then we got months of debating with some faceless bureaucrat.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's the uncertainty, and we're unlikely to get answers. It was very helpful that someone recently asked for a Freedom of Information request about the masks in churches and was knocked back. The health department would not give them the basis for saying that churches should have stricter policies on mask wearing than other venues, and refused to give the basis for that. Now that's unhelpful territory in terms of where these health restrictions are going if they're unaccountable, unexplained, and that's a concern.
Now, let's just reflect for a minute on what are the various options of things we could do as churches, because different church leaders who are watching us, listening to us now, will be making different decisions. So let's explore. I mean, we've got a public health order. What could we do? What are the various things you've canvassed in your head or with your staff team the last 24 hours?
Yeah, we've been thinking about different options, and in one sense, the context for us is that we're already in a situation that isn't ideal, where singing in the Bible is about getting together, encouraging one another with God's word, and being overflowing with thankfulness to God. We can't do that. So we're already in a situation where what we want to do, we can't do. So in one sense, we're talking about, is it a pre-recorded song or is it live? And live is obviously better, but we're still a long way away from the ideal for us. So in one sense, this isn't the biggest deal, but we've thought through options of just go ahead with the live singing, or some pre-recorded singing that we've had from the past. We've thought about having them in different locations, like looking at is the advice allow for the singers to be outside, and so we actually have a camera on the back deck of church.
Yeah. I mean, you could have a singer with headphones on, listening to the feed, just out the door there and singing away and entertaining the neighbours.
That's right. Again, it's not ideal, but I think for us, we want our gathering, even as it's kind of online, to feel consistent with what we normally do, to really say, and we're looking forward to being back. And so to kind of have people come and lead us in song, I love that. And it's a big part of what we do as Christians. So to be able to figure out how to do that. So maybe outside, maybe in a different location altogether, and you're kind of crossing to them in someone's home. Technologically, I think that kind of, we would find that a little hard
I think we can do it, but
yeah,
but most churches are going to struggle with that.
Yeah. So there's some of the options that we've been thinking through. Or actually the other option is to not have singing so to really have Bible reading and prayer and the talk. We don't want to go that path, but that was on the list of possibilities, that if we can't do what we would like, or maybe we just don't do it for. But who knows how long this will go, and you don't want to set a precedent necessarily. So it's tricky.
What are you thinking, Dave?
Well, I want to talk to my music team. I haven't been able to do that yet. Some of them are at work and things like that this morning. But we don't want to pressure people into doing things they're uncomfortable with. Now, obviously, there's a wide range of opinions and personalities and anxiety levels through COVID that we're dealing with people. And so we work with that rather than against that and pressure people into doing things that they don't want to do. But there is also a matter of thinking about some of the legal, very clearly legal options are actually more risky in terms of COVID. And so we want to always be keeping people safe, protecting people from harm in what's going on. But whether at this point just saying this email that isn't in the public health order is what we need to comply with right now, there'll be some more discussions that happen between now and Sunday about how we respond to that, how we might do it. We might schedule, some of our band are all related.
Well, that is another option. We have that too, in that a number of our band members are in the same family. We could have a family band.
Yes, that's right.
But again, I don't like the New South Wales Health Department speaking into the way we run the church in that way. Yeah.
In one sense, there's been some freedom we've had in New South Wales that some other states haven't had, which has been great because they've said we want to beware of these risks and use common sense, and there's been freedom. And really some of the problems have come when people have said too much, tell us the nitty gritty. What about this unique situation? What happens then? And that's ended up actually being unhelpful because the responses we get to those inquiries is likely to be more restrictive than more freedom. And so
that's actually helpful. Better to let the decision be made by common sense people at the local level who've thought through the health risks, who are trying to use common sense, than having a, if you like, centralised edict.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's right.
Now, on that note, let me take you to the Archbishop's letter, because he hasn't given us a centralised edict.
Yes.
He's given some advice, but not an instruction or directive.
He's passed on advice.
Passed on advice, yeah. So he's really just, and in the show notes we've linked to the Archbishop's letter, but he's basically cut and pasted the Health Department email, and he doesn't at any point say, I like it. He doesn't at any point say, I love it. He doesn't at any point say, this is terrific. He says, I appreciate the late notice of this ban on singing from the Health Department will be difficult for many churches and will require significant changes for this Sunday. Bishop Koo has been seeking clarity and making representations on our behalf as yet to no avail. I think the wisest course is to accept the advice for the coming weekend. We've already raised with the New South Wales Government our view that a total ban on singing appears inconsistent with Clause 14 of the Public Health Order, which is essentially the point that Neil Foster made just a moment ago. Should the lockdown continue beyond July 9, we'll make further strong representations. So, very significantly, he doesn't say, you must do this, or I direct you to do this, or but he says, the way I read it, the wise thing to do is this. Again, allowing for common sense at the local level. Is that
yes,
how you
I
read
think
it?
so, yes.
Yeah.
I think helping, talking with other people in the same context is always helpful for us to work out together what's actually meant, what does this mean in our context, how do we reflect on best practice.
So you've talked about listening to the Archbishop's advice, but also listening to your music team's advice.
I think I want to be wary of their mental health situation, their health situation, concerns they have. I want to think about the context I'm in, my own building, which is quite different to some other people's buildings.
You've got a very big complex.
Absolutely. And that has an impact on the risks that are or aren't there. There are other people who are meeting in, say, school buildings. And so their context is they have restrictions that are imposed on them by a school or another organisation. That means they have to follow that and keep their landlord happy. And so, again, when we think about what's common sense, what's being wise in our situation and the people we're dealing with and what's helpful for them, then I think that gives a broader picture of the best way forward.
The advice you're seeking, Adrian?
Well, this is part of the conversation. I like talking to friends and colleagues about the way they're moving forward on this one. I think the bigger question that we're faced is if they change the public health order to make it really super clear by Sunday, there is the question of what does Christian submission to the government look like? And I think Daniel and his friends give us a great model of that because they are working for the government, they're administering the empire, they're foreigners, and yet they are submissive and compliant. But when the government, when the emperor tells them to worship in a certain way, or you're not allowed to worship in a certain way, they defy. But their defiance is still submissive in the sense of they won't do it, but they will suffer the consequences. The government has every right to throw them in the fire or throw them in the lion's den. So I think there's a point where as Christians we go, we submit to the government. When they start telling us what we can worship, can't worship, must worship, how we worship, there comes a point where we'll say, well, actually we worship God and we'll follow him, but you have a right to then, as the government, issue consequences to us. So I think that's part of our discussion of how do we, in the ongoing nature of COVID, think there are points where the government is telling us not to do things that are essential and to do things that we don't feel comfortable with. There comes a point where we can submissively say no to them. And that's, I mean, there's wisdom there and conscience, but trying to figure it, submission doesn't always mean, in the context of the government, saying yes to everything they say. It's also, I think, allowing them to be the government when you've defied them in the name of worshipping God. But that's, I think that's a bigger discussion for maybe another day.
I just want to make one concluding point on the last thing of saying, I think we're free to weigh the advice of St Andrew's House and weigh the advice of other people and then make a decision without in any way being out of fellowship with St Andrew's House, just to be clear about that. But if we come back to us and the government, Neil, when do we draw the line on the government on these issues? I know you and I have kicked this around a bit over the last year and a half.
My view at the moment would be if we got to the stage where the public health order did literally say what the health department was advising, then we should obey it. Because I think the line, to my mind, is where you very clearly see that the government is telling you to do something that the Bible prohibits or not do something that the Bible requires. And while the Bible encourages us to meet together with God's people, I don't think it gives us a particular format for that. And so I would be inclined to say we should obey the government's regulations if they are enacted into law at the moment. But of course it will be different, and it may be the case, for example, where the government prohibits you from teaching a part of the Bible, as we've seen possibly is going to happen in Victoria in February next year, where there may be a situation where a Christian pastor would have to say, no, I can't obey that rule from the government.
Right, and so David Clark should continue to pray in his Woolworths car park at the moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because the Bible tells us to pray. It doesn't exactly say you have to pray outside abortion clinics. So I think there's
protest, he's just
we can have
room
for a wise debate about that one. To be absolutely clear, I think the law restricting prayer outside abortion clinics is a bad law, but I'm not sure that it quite comes to that point of something we should disobey, but I know other Christians will disagree.
Right. Neil Foster, thanks for talking to us.
Thanks very much.
And thank you, Adrian Russell and David Clark. My guests on The Pastor's Heart in this special edition are Adrian Russell, who is the senior pastor of Northmead Anglican Church, David Clark, who leads the ministry at Hoxton Park, and Neil Foster, the Associate Professor of Law at the University of Newcastle. You've been with us on this Pastor's Heart special, and we'll look forward to your company next Tuesday afternoon.